let's start by having you introduce yourselves, tell me a little bit about your investment thesis, and very quickly define what visual technology means.
Yeah, sure. Is this on? Yeah. So I'm Michael Dempsey. I'm a partner at a firm called The Compound here in New York. We focus on basically taking a thesis-driven view on investing in a lot of more emerging technologies. I focus a lot on machine learning, robotics, and other areas like that. We're seed stage investors. In terms of visual technology, I would say it's pretty broad, but how I think about it and where I spend a lot of time is basically how are computers or sensors or pieces of hardware viewing the world, and what are they doing with the information they gather from that. And I know there's other pockets that are a little more consumerish or more broad, but that's where I spend time.
Hi, is this working? I'm Rachel Lamb. I'm at a firm that I founded with the former CEO of Time Warner. It's called Imagination Capital. I ran the venture capital group at Time Warner for 14 years and started up in 2003, so have seen the entire evolution of visual tech, which used to be mostly video tech. So feel free to ask me questions about that. Our firm focuses on three different areas. One is next generation content, and I encapsulate a lot of the video stuff that we look at there, people that are trying to do something interesting and different, usually with video. And then we also look at big data machine learning. And I don't say AI because of the fact that I think that we look for situations where we understand the customer input or output. And so that does still touch oftentimes the media world. And then the last area that we do look at is we look at this bucket where we look for industry shifts. And so that's what gives us the flexibility to probably look outside of the realm where our networks are probably the most helpful, which is in the digital media realm. But we will look at things where there's an industry shift that is powering what we call gives the entrepreneur a little bit more room for error. And so that gives us a little more flexibility in our range of investments. And we usually invest in institutional seed rounds, which is usually, we avoid the pre-seed. We go to that $2 to $3 million first institutional round of capital. Thanks.
And hi, everyone. My name is Matt Turck. I'm a partner at FirstMark. FirstMark is a mostly Series A firm based here in New York with $1.6 billion under management, very active in the New York ecosystem, but we also invest everywhere in the country and a little bit in Europe as well. Investors in Pinterest, Airbnb, Envision, Shopify, a bunch of things, both across consumer and enterprise. And to answer your question, for me, so I spend a fair amount of time in the general sort of data world, machine learning and AI. So when I think of visual technologies, a little bit like Michael, I think of it essentially in terms of computer vision.
Yeah, and speaking of Pinterest, this year, obviously, Pinterest and Zoom are kind of having a moment going public. What do you attribute that prominence or success to with visual technologies right now?
Yeah, so for Pinterest, it's a really interesting question because actually I think the wrong way of thinking about Pinterest is as a social network. Even though there are some elements of product-centric social networking, what Pinterest ultimately is or has become is precisely a visual search technology. So it's a way of finding stuff using images, getting recommendations also based on images, on your phone, on the web. And the pivotal moment for Pinterest was very much when they acquired a couple of small machine learning companies back in 2014 and 2015. And the company has really completely evolved to become effectively AI-centric, which, by the way, is a characteristic of all the large successful internet companies, right? Facebook is largely a deep learning company, Google is a deep learning company, and Pinterest very much so as well.
I do remember there was a period of time where Pinterest was hiring all these people from Google, and I was like, what is happening? Okay, so obviously investing in some of these companies requires a lot of patience and capital before they hit the mainstream. What do you guys tell your portfolio companies? How do you advise them to measure success when some of those traditional indicators like users or revenue isn't quite there yet?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I think that there's the first order of can you recruit really great talent away from places that can pay, especially in the machine learning world, 2 to 5x more than the startups can. I think that's an interesting signal to show that you're doing something that is both interesting to the community, and a community that is very tight-knit, at least in kind of computer vision, machine learning world. And you're doing something that can start to scale towards kind of multiple different functions within an organization. I think the other thing, too, is often like, even though you can't have revenue, you can have conversations with people that would do pilots or would do unpaid pilots or would kind of do an LOI at some point at maybe late seed stage when there's more of a product to develop or product to work on. But those are the, I think a lot about like talent magnets, and these companies are probably in one of the steepest imbalance of supply and demand of engineering like we've seen in a long time. So that's always really important to me.
Yeah.
Just thinking, I'm very glad you're asking the question, because I think that's one of the central questions and something that's not super well understood, which is that computer vision companies and AI companies in general are much more frontier tech and deep tech companies than people tend to think. So especially over the last like 2 or 3 years, as the AI hype went up and down or up again, depending on where we are in the hype cycle, there was like this idea that AI is going to be everywhere, and just the way you wouldn't say, hey, I run a database company, you would not say, hey, I run an AI company, right? That would become this ubiquitous component, and I think that's directionally correct long term, but I think we absolutely not at that stage right now, and we are still in the deep tech moment of AI, and precisely, your ability to recruit top talent becomes super important. But from a fundraising perspective, it's super tricky, right? Because indeed you're going to show up at that Series A, but by the way, also Series B with just not that much compared to especially your SaaS cousins, and it's compounded by the fact that because you need that kind of talent, your company DNA is going to be super technical, but that which is great, but also creates that risk of like science for the sake of science. You attract super smart people that like to work on a hard problem, but guess what? They like to work on a hard problem, so like they're gonna go very, very deep in in trying to solve the thing. And what I've learned working with AI companies and computer vision companies is that sort of quickly you get into a weird place where actually, in terms of end value to the customer, you can generate almost as much value doing super simple stuff around the AI as what you actually deliver with the AI.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think that we have a company on our portfolio called Forge.ai, and we've looked at it's a big problem that they're going after, which is they're taking unstructured data sets, massive unstructured data sets, and trying to create structured data sets for other machines. And so it's the machine-to-machine promise that the internet has always had, but it is, you're going to fintech customers, you've got long sales cycle, and the question is it is tricky with the funding. I mean, we are not a big fund. They do have an A-round investor that is a larger fund. And so when we look at these opportunities, we're like, okay, there's only so many in the portfolio that we can take that are true, more science. And but then when you look at that company and you're thinking, okay, how do you get to the next round of capital? There are not, I call modules. There are module products that are easier to sell, lower sales cycle or shorter sales cycles, and so that you can start to show that the customer set is interested in using your product. It often sounds like a great idea, and then you can't get any initial traction, you can't get any paid tests going, and it becomes a pretty difficult thing to raise if you've already raised an A, and then all you have to get to a B. And when at Time Warner, I was predominantly a B-round investor, and B-round investors are not looking at product market fit, right? They're looking for, is this company, they assume you have product market fit, and then can you sustain it? And so it becomes a tough fundraise if you haven't started to show that you can build a client service organization, that you can have a sales team that knows how to close. And so all these things, I do urge companies to still stay. You want to look for the big idea, which is going to get you the $1 billion exit, which again, I try not to say that because I think so few companies actually have them. But I do think that knowing specifically what you have under your control, I also tell my teams, what is under your control? And what can you actually get done without waiting for some big out of your control element to happen for you? And if you can do modules where there are things in your control and hit them, then I think that you also look to your existing investors. Can you guys, if I get to this milestone, will you fund me? And so that you don't always have to go outside and attract a new investor.
And you kind of touched on this, but how do you assess the risk factors before investing in these companies, given that there's not a ton to look at?
At seed, I mean, it's a lot of like, it's so cliche, but it's like a lot of team, but a lot of it is understanding, for me, like within research communities, is it something that is going to be, as Matt was alluding to, like a company and not a research project?
How do you do that?
So I think how we do that is we say, is this a team that has a view of, we want to build technology to solve a problem, but we want to build a product around that like problem solving nature, whatever that is. Some time horizons are longer where it's, we have a very unique approach on how to get a car to drive itself. And we think that based off of our background and based off of the research we've done as PhDs, we can adapt to that research and do it. Other times it's, we've talked to these customers because we've been at a company for a long time that has been working on this problem. We think that, we can build a better solution, X, Y, Z. I think once you start to say, look at a little later companies, you start to look at more proof points around like actual commercialization. But for us, often we're investing pre-revenue, sometimes pre-product, and we'll do kind of pre-seed all the way to seed plus or Series A.
Any other? Yeah.
I actually, it's because, again, we are not a large fund. And so when we take a bet where it looks like it's a future bet, I look for who else is around the table. So there is
in terms of other investors?
Other investors who have certainly more capital to continue to, we usually write a $250K to $500K check in a $2 to $3 million institutional seed round. We also allocate capital for an equal size check in a seed extension. And so I look for there to be a lead investor when we go in that can galvanize the group to actually then do the seed extension to get a company that's showing promise, but actually needs a little more time to get to an A. And so that's important for me. I look at other folks who probably also have a bigger team than I do to really have mapped out the space.
Lots of different things. There's a team, there's data acquisition strategies that even at the earlier stages need to be fairly clear.
Oh, really? Like you need to have an acquisition strategy?
You need to have an idea. Which, by the way...
Are you talking about data acquisition, or are you talking about... Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, sorry.
I'm sorry, what...
Just an exit.
Oh, sorry, no, that's a French accent plus hangover from our CEO dinner last night. One in terms of separating the science projects from the actual companies that have a chance to get enough velocity to get the next round. One way I like to think about the problem is this a situation where the team is leveraging AI to solve a problem that needs to be 100% correct 100% of the time? If that is the case, the risk of getting into an infinite loop of AI research becomes much higher, largely because AI is very good at predicting a number of things with very high accuracy and very bad at getting to 100% success scenario 100% of the time. If that is a scenario where the product does need to deliver 100%, then what are the workflows or hacks that can be put in place so that you get to 100%? But I personally, as an investor, feel typically a lot more excited about situations where AI is going to do 90% of the journey, and as it turns out, 90% is going to be 10x better than existing solutions. But if it fails 10% of the time, nobody dies, nobody loses tremendous amounts of money, and that to me indicates that the team can get to product market fit and the type of escape velocity we want to see much earlier.
Got it. I want to ask you guys a question. How many of you have been to the Amazon Go store? Okay, yeah. It's wild. It's just like they just opened one in my building, and I went and just scanned the app. You go in, you grab all the stuff, and then you leave, and then it knows. And it tells you spent like 30 seconds in here. What's amazing, though, is that it raises all sorts of like computer vision, facial recognition, privacy questions. So one, I'm curious what you think about the privacy implications of all this technology is, and two, why are we not talking about Amazon? We're talking about Facebook. Well, isn't Amazon kind of like the beast?
I think people kind of I bucket them all now into one group in terms of why are we not talking about them, like Amazon, Facebook, Google, increasingly OpenAI. I think we talk about them because they haven't been as front and center maybe about a lot of the research they're doing, and they're not as open, and they don't publish as much on the research side and kind of make hype around what they publish. The privacy stuff I think is tough. Like I think there's kind of two camps you fall into. You fall into like the first, and this could be totally wrong, but one camp of like, we need to figure this out. We need to make sure that there's like checks and balances in place as we go along. Otherwise, we're going to have a really dystopian future where everyone has a number, like that Black Mirror episode where you could upvote, downvote, and all these terrible things. And then there's the other of like, we need to make sure that these technologies even work and provide the value that we think they can, and then we need to kind of figure it out along the way. And I think that I probably fall closer to that side. I think that there are simple things around, like facial recognition within use of like government use is something that is really scary at times for a bunch of different reasons around both like bias within data sets, facial recognition, as well as just the kind of state of the government and how much people trust the different legislations today and groups within the government today. But yeah, I think it's something we need to talk about. But it's also at times you run into this area where you're talking to people who have views that the technology is a lot more powerful than it is today. So that's kind of my view on it.
So you kind of separate government from private companies.
Government use, yeah. In the use private company use, yeah.
Huh. That's interesting.
Sometimes the government is a great first customer for some of these companies. But I think that what I try to avoid is, I lived through the whole VR kind of investment phase where there is a huge wow factor. Like, the nano photonics talk, that was amazing. And then you think, well, it's just right here. Then I've got to get a bet in because it's just right here. I do try to, and the synthetic media stuff is another thing that, I'm sure that we are going to spend a lot of time looking at. And then that has a huge creep factor for me. And I've looked at companies where they have cameras that can and processors that can really process a lot of street data. And I go and I've done diligence. I've watched the computer and it scans back and forth and it's recreating, and so it actually understands the objects it's seeing, from like a dog to a scooter and I'm like, how is the computer doing that? And what is kind of give me a broad, layman's term of the algo behind it? And they'll like, that's a deeper question than you think, because we don't know.
Oh.
You don't know actually how it's learning. It's just, it's processing. And you're like, okay, so when I look at a lot of these things, I always try to get over the, boy, that's really cool. And whenever you see the demo, you always think it's right around the corner, and it's really not, because then you start to think about who you have to displace and what is the incumbent. Certainly like with the video stuff, you've always had to look at what's the incumbent server of this need in the market today. And then I try to balance, when I look at our portfolio, between stuff that there is some future bets, but then there are also ones that are smaller problems that they're going after, but that actually are nearer term. So I look at like timeline for that. And why are we not talking about? I think that people certainly, and it's probably because the AV stuff for Google is so prevalent and stuff. But I would imagine that there's a ton of retail technologies that are using cameras and stuff that they'll be right there.
Yeah, that's just wild.
It's interesting though. The pressure is real now on all those companies to care about privacy. There's been like this sea change over the last, like year and a half or something, which I think is extraordinarily healthy. But privacy used to be something that nobody cared about, like no one. Which is amazing. The fact like Facebook, when the breach happened, like people are like, oh my god, like what? Facebook has all of this data, which is perhaps in this room obvious to all of us, but surprisingly wasn't. But like I see across our portfolio companies and like hey, everybody, like GDPR was like this super important thing. Like a lot of people did a lot of work around all of this. Amazon is getting into real trouble right now with recognition. So it's obviously super important, but it's also complex in so many ways, right? Because you could see a world where China officially just completely overtakes the US just because they are not slowed down by those critical aspects. So finding the right compromise between what's good for society but what's good for the US and Europe is complex. And by the way, I also think this is a great avenue for entrepreneurs to start companies. So if there are deep fakes, I think you can build great companies doing deep fake recognition. If everybody needs to know exactly in their companies where the sensitive information is, then AI to locate sensitive information is really interesting as well. So there's a whole avenue of opportunities for entrepreneurs around that.
Yeah, I was just reading an article about identity theft, and I feel like in this new world, that's probably not even going to be an issue, given that there's cameras everywhere. Sorry, I'm just very confused by it. So, Michael, you wrote this really good post that today's tech titans have gotten so good at disrupting themselves that they're willing to throw a ton of money at R&D to kind of disrupt themselves and enter these new industries. So if I'm a startup founder working on this new technology, am I just going to get crushed by these people?
Yeah, I think there's a likelihood that the answer is yes. I think that the main thing that I always talk to open up when I talk to like a machine learning founder or something like that, that if your core premise is that your algorithm is state of the art today, assume that within 6 months it won't be, because there's more people who are doing a significantly, spending more money, have more bodies thrown at a problem, and are thinking about kind of ways to iterate upon what state of the art is for whatever problem set is. So I think that the main thing that you have to think about when you're thinking about what are the big companies working on is what are the things that they care about as stakeholders, and how much do they want to own that given problem, and will they actually be able to move from research into like a commercial product. I think like for everything that, in my mind, everything that Google does on the research side, and I think they are some of the most brilliant minds, specifically with machine learning, I think that they have not shown a great ability to move outside of their core competency in a lot of these areas. In terms of shipping new products, I think they iterate upon like small features within their products that are not actually so small, like the Gmail auto-suggests that everyone on Twitter now is like, I'm the most boring person ever because this suggests everything that I would have said. So yeah, my view is you have to have like the thing we talked about is like data network effects or data loops. How do you have better acquisition? I think that there's pros and cons to that as well. But I think the main thing is state of the art cannot be your thing that you're standing on forever. And if that's not the case, then maybe it's you're really good at productization, you're really good at commercialization, you have some unique domain expertise as to why the way you're solving this will actually work within large customers. Or you go the other way and you build kind of a full stack startup and say, we're going to replace the incumbents and do more of kind of like the open door model or something like that.
I think that if you have a team that is truly unique, and you really think that team has an experience in doing something in hard research before that you can port over, they still have an advantage. They can still, and then if they don't, then they can get acqui-hired. But and so the team there, I think, is your real, because a lot of folks don't want to work at the big companies, right? Where we've spent time is actually looking for applications that are not, where the core factor is not, like if I hear that your next competitor is a Google or a Facebook in terms of like the science behind it, that's going to make me nervous. And so we look for companies that are using AI or machine learning very intelligently for a real stated end goal purpose, and it creates a product that's even better because of it. And so that then doesn't go head-on competition with those guys.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think the moment for horizontal AI applications has probably passed a couple of years ago. That was the time of those quick but expensive, high-priced acqui-hires, so that's come and gone. And clearly, AWS and GCP and everybody is moving up the stack, and creating a full spectrum of image recognition, speech recognition, translation, all of this driven by AI is clearly what they've been doing. By the way, they tend to not be great right now, not being that customizable, not that user-friendly, but it will come. So indeed, I think it's all about vertical applications now, specifically like last mile vertical applications that touch the business user, as opposed to somebody in the tech group or in the IT department at the customer. The good news is that I think we're still very early in that phase of vertical AI applications, and there's a whole world out there. I think Jillian was talking about back office. I think that's a very ripe area to do this type of thing. So a bunch of places in the enterprise, and then a bunch of different verticals where it's in some ways sort of simple. You take problem X, you add AI to it, you see if AI does make a 10x difference or not. If it doesn't, you move on to the next ID. If it does, you have something there. And like every single application basically can be enhanced or has a chance of being enhanced by AI. So we're very early in that phase.
What are some of the biggest sectors you see being disrupted by visual technologies in the next decade?
Gotta think on that for a minute.
Well, it's sort of actually what I just said. Like I think what's super exciting is that it's just about everything, right? So right now the obvious candidates are the medical field, and I think there's been at least like 2 or 3 sessions during this summit about it. So obviously because there's so many images for everything, and it requires so much expert knowledge to understand those images, and deep learning works so well with those. I think that's already done. Although interestingly, it's what we, the tech community, have been talking about for a long time, but effectively it's just starting to happen, actually, that disruption, like in radiology and that type of thing is still actually super early, but it's definitely happening. The other obvious area is transportation. So, I don't know if it's level 5 type thing, but, it'll start, with, something, then something a bit more, and then something a bit more, but that's inevitable. I don't know how long that's going to take. But what's exciting, again, is that like it's all across the map. It can be, in the insurance world, there's a couple of companies, and actually also Ant Financial in China that are looking at images of damage and collision in cars, and can you automate that? Yes. In the back office world, we have a company in our portfolio called Hyperscience that basically looks at all those forms, whether electronic or paper. Some of them are handwritten, some of them are typed, but ultimately the American economy runs on forms. To do just about anything, you need to submit a form somewhere. And what if you think of a form as an image, and then you're able to extract meaning from the form? Can you automate this at scale? So the examples are endless.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's definitely, you can, on any of the workflow processes that really, there's just a lot of inefficiencies. So you can go after this, even like payments or procurement. There are places there where I think that just changing the way it gets done and doing it smarter so that, I saw a company, I'm not an investor in it, but where they literally change how you expense things, because in real time it actually has a chat bot in front of you, and you actually ask for real time approval of your expenses before you put it in, so there is no wastage. So you actually can't have somebody violate the policy because it won't issue the payment. There are things like that are just really smart, practical, in front of things. I spent more of my life in the entertainment world, and so do I think that there is more disruption to happen for the video world and the entertainment world? I think that it's probably more just better digital content. I think that there are better ways of going after how you entertain people, how you engage people. What is entertainment is changing. So, it used to be, sitting back and watching a video image. I think that now people really do expect much more higher levels of interactivity, and where they get it has certainly been disrupted. Do I see a sea change with like AR and VR? I think that I've always thought that AR is going to be first in the enterprise. I think that seeing this nano photonics thing, I think that as the form factor gets to where you can really, easily put it on the, I don't know if anyone here has done the Magic Leap demo, but it's still it's a big old headset. So if it does actually get to the point where it is really light and easy, there are a ton of interesting ways that entertainment in this world would be different. You probably all wouldn't have to be sitting here. You could probably be all sitting at home, and we all be kind of beamed in front of you. And so there's just tons of changes. I don't know if it's really disruption. It'd just be a different way of delivery.
Yeah, the only last one I'll add is creativity broadly. I think that's one people don't talk about as much, but across both animation and even writing in some ways, I think the way unsupervised or self-supervised learning is progressing, we're going to start to see more and more people using machine learning if we can abstract it away from a technical interface for a lot more creative processes.
Like, what's an example of that?
So an example would be like being able to take there's a paper that just came out of someone who took a bunch of line art and colored an entire episode of Dragon Ball Z with like a generative adversarial network to automatically do it. So something that would normally you would outsource to an animation house in Asia or you would have in-house, now you can do with fairly high accuracy if you have enough training data. And I think as more and more we start to build models that need significantly less training data to do these types of things, or we can transfer from one model to another, we're going to start to see that used a lot more. It's just how do we build an interface that is able to be abstracted away a little bit so that creatives can use it, not only machine learning engineers. And we've invested in a company that is doing that, but that's in Brooklyn. But yeah, that's one area that I think is interesting that people don't mention enough because it's kind of scary as well.
So it can basically write my article for me.
Maybe someday, probably not.
Great. Do you guys have questions?
We've got time for one or two questions, and I'm sure they'll be sticking around for a couple minutes after if anybody has more questions.
Okay, Simon Applebaum again from Tomorrow Be Televised. Rachel, you mentioned that you're investing in next generation content. What content companies are you investing in?
So I'm glad you asked, Simon. I think Simon's been doing this as long as I have. So we have invested in one company called CoStar Astrology, which actually is using AI and machine learning to create really, really personalized astrology product for you. So, and you can test compatibility with other folks on really granular, personalized factors. And so it's just grown really nicely. It has huge engagement. And it does, you have to give it your time of birth and your date of birth, and it actually does line up with like NASA stars, and it uses data to then create these daily updates as well as when you do the compatibility. The other company that I would mention is Overtime. It's a company that is a sports entertainment company and is trying to create an over-the-top sports network without the cost of sports rights. And so there I see them as turning the distribution model inside out is the way I describe it, which is that trying to then create the distributed audience of hundreds of millions of Gen Z folks that are watching it, and then proving that there's the audience, and then having enough audience to then invest the money for the production value content to then go back to the traditional media outlets and create an audience there. And that would be without the cost of sports rights, but it is sports entertainment. It's all around high school basketball, but if you think about high school basketball, it's pretty much professional basketball because of the fact of the way that sport works. And so and we've had a couple of those. Can you turn the model inside out? It doesn't use any incredible technology, but there are some technologies that are behind that, and people are using computer vision to actually create the highlights even better. Some people have used it. I've seen it in the esports realm as well. We have a couple of esports investments where people are using the AI to watch the gameplay and then auto-create the highlights so that and push them out in great quantity to a lot of folks. So you create a big distributed audience, you prove the audience, and then you create the high production value content. In the traditional world, you created high production value content and you hope people came and watched it. So nowadays you have the data and the audience first, and then you turn the model inside out.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And if you have any more questions, we'll be around for a little bit.
Thank you, panel. Thank you, everybody.